Hi, everybody. We are on chapter 8 now of The City of Ember. And in this last section of reading, things had gotten kind of hopeful for Lena. She found some pieces of some instructions, which she's very excited about. But unfortunately, everyone she's reached out for hasn't really shared that enthusiasm. So when Captain Fleary came to her house, she told Lena not to worry too much about it, that she should become a believer and just trust that the builders will come back for her. Lizzie wanted to gossip. Lizzie wasn't really interested in, embracing the instructions or even thinking about them. And then, of course, she sent the letter to Mayor Cole, and Mayor Cole, unfortunately, never responded. So this goes to show Lena that while she sees value in something, not everyone does, and that tends to be a little frustrating. So her goal right now is to reach out to Dune, but chapter 8 is from Dune's perspective. So let's see what Dune is up to, and then we'll see Lena cross paths with him. Chapter 8, Explorations. Dune had taken to wandering the pipeworks alone. He would go to his assigned tunnel and do his job quickly. Once you got good at using your wrenches and brushes and tubes of glue, it wasn't hard. Most of the workers did their jobs quickly and then gathered in little groups to play cards or have salamander races or just talk and sleep. But Dune didn't care about any of that. If he was going to be stuck in the pipeworks, he would at least not waste the time he had. Since the long blackout, everything seemed more urgent than ever. Whenever the lights flickered, he was afraid the ancient generator might be shuddering to a permanent halt. So, while the others lounged around, he headed out toward the edges of the pipeworks to see what he could see. Pay attention, his father had said, and that's what he did. He followed his map when he could, but in some places the map was unclear. There were even tunnels that didn't show up on the map at all. To keep from getting lost, he dropped a trail of things as he walked. Washers, bolts, pieces of wire, whatever he had in his tool belt, and then he picked them up on his way back. His father had been at least a little bit right. There were interesting things in the pipeworks if you paid attention. Already he had found 3 new crawling creatures, a black beetle the size of a pinhead, a moth with furry wings, and best of all, a creature with a soft, shiny body and a small spiral-patterned shell on its back. Just after he found this one, he was sitting on the floor watching in fascination as the creature crept up his arm. A couple of workers came by and saw him. They burst into laughter. "It's Bug Boy," one of them said. "He's collecting bugs for his lunch." Enraged, Dune jumped up and shouted at them. His sudden motion made the creature fall off his arm to the ground, and Dune felt a crunch beneath his foot. The laughing workers didn't notice. They tossed a few more taunts at him and walked away. But Dune knew instantly what he had done. He lifted his foot and looked at the squashed mess underneath. Unintended consequences, he thought miserably. He was angry at his anger. The way it surged up and took over. He picked the bits of shell and goo off the shoe of his boot and thought, "I'm sorry. I didn't mean to hurt you." So this is really the second time we're hearing from Dune about his anger, right? And it was the one scene where he threw a heel of a shoe at the door and it hit his dad. And his dad warned him about anger. So the idea that we're seeing this more than once gives us the idea that maybe dealing with your anger in a way that's productive is part of the theme of this book, right? Remember, themes are those ideas that pop up multiple times in a story and reflect what it is the author believes. So anger, definitely important, if not a theme, okay? Let's keep going. In the days that followed, Dune went farther and farther into the pipeworks, holding on to the hope that he might find something not only interesting, but important. But what he found didn't seem important at all. Once he came upon a pair of old pliers that someone had dropped and left behind. Twice he found a coin. He discovered a supply closet that appeared to have been completely forgotten, but all it held were some boxes of plugs and washers and a rusty box containing shriveled bits of what must once have been someone's lunch. So he doesn't feel like this is important, but as a reader, this kind of caught my attention. He discovered a supply closet that appeared to have been completely forgotten. If he found a closet that nobody remembered, isn't it possible that there are more closets like this? Things that aren't on the map, things that people have forgotten, things that nobody's seen because they don't have maybe the adventurous spirit that Dune does. So it's just something to keep in mind as a reader, that perhaps things are not always clearly labeled on the map, and perhaps there are some answers in the observations that Dune is making. He found another supply closet at the far south end of the pipeworks. At least he assumed that's what it was. It was at the end of a tunnel with a rope strung across it. A sign hanging from the rope said, "Caved in, no entry." Dune entered anyway, ducking under the rope. He found no sign of a cave-in, but there were no lights. He groped his way forward for about 20 steps or so, and there the tunnel ended in a securely locked door. He couldn't see it, but he felt it. He retraced his steps, ducked back under the rope again, and walked on. A short distance away, he found a hatch in the ceiling of the tunnel. A square wooden panel that must lead, he thought, up to the storerooms. If he'd had something to stand on, he could have reached it and tried to open it, but it was about a foot above his outstretched hand. Probably it was locked anyhow. He wondered if the builders had used openings like this one during the construction of the city to get more easily from one place to another. So that's kind of an interesting thought as well. And again, he's saying, I didn't find anything important. But he's finding these doorways and passages that other people don't know about. On days when his job was near the main tunnel, he sometimes walked along the river after he finished working. He stayed away from the east end where the generator was. He did not want to think about the generator. Instead, he went the other way, toward the place where the river rushed out of the pipeworks. The path grew less level at this end and less smooth. The river here was bordered with clumps of wrinkled rock that seemed to grow out of the ground like fungus. Dune liked to sit on these clumps, running his fingers along the strange creases and crevices that must have been carved somehow by running or dripping water. In some places there were grooves that looked almost like writing. But as for things of importance, Dune found none. It seemed that the pipeworks was no use after all to a person who wanted to save the city. The generator was hopeless. He would never understand electricity. He used to think he could use electricity to invent a movable light if he studied hard enough. He took apart light bulbs. He took apart electric outlets on the wall to see how the wires inside wound together, and in the process got a painful vibrating jolt all through his body. But when he tried to wind wires of his own together in exactly the same way, nothing happened. It was what came through the wires that made the light, he finally understood, and he had no idea what that was. Now he could only see two courses of action. He could give up and do nothing, or he could start to work on a different kind of movable light. Dune didn't want to give up. So, on his day off one Thursday, he went to the Ember library to look up fire. The library occupied an entire building on one side of Bilbolio Square. Its door was at the end of a short passage in the middle of the building. Dune went down the passage, pushed open the door, and walked in. No one was there except the librarian, ancient Edward Pocket, who sat behind his desk writing something with a tiny pencil clutched in his gnarled hand. The library had two big rooms, one for fiction, which was stories people had made up out of their imaginations, and the other for fact, which was information about the real world. The walls of both rooms were lined with shelves, and on most of the shelves were hundreds of packets of pages. Each packet was held together with stout loops of string. The packets leaned against each other at angles and lay in untidy stacks. Some were thick, and some were so slim that only a clip was needed to hold them together. The pages of the oldest packets were yellowed and warped, and their edges were uneven rows of ripples. Rows of ripples. That's a lovely alliteration right there. These were the books of Ember, written over the years by its citizens. They contained in their close written pages much that was imagined and everything that was known. Edward Pocket looked up briefly and nodded at Dune, one of his most frequent visitors. Dune nodded back. He went into the fact room to the section of shelves labeled F. The books were arranged by subject, but even so, it wasn't easy to find what you wanted. A book about moths, for instance, might be under M for moths, or I for insects, or B for bugs. It might even be under F for flying things. Usually you had to browse through the entire library to make sure you'd found all the books on one subject. But since he was looking for fire, he thought he might as well start with F. Fire was rare in Ember. When there was a fire, it was because there had been an accident. Someone had left a dish towel too close to an electric burner on a stove, or a cord had frayed and a spark had flown and ignited curtains. Then the citizens would rush in with buckets of water and the fire was quickly drowned. But it was, of course, possible to start a fire on purpose. You could hold a sliver of wood to the stove burner until it burst into flame, and then, for a moment, it would flare brightly, giving off orange light. The trick was to find a way to make the light last. If you had a light that would keep going, you could go into the unknown regions and see what was there. Finding a way to explore the unknown regions was the only thing Dune could think to do. He took down a book from the F shelf. Fungus, it was called. He put it back. The next book was called How to Repair Furniture. He put that back too. He went through foot diseases, fun with string, coping with failure, and canned fruit recipes before he finally found a book called All About Fire. He sat down at one of the library's square tables to read it. But the person who had written the book knew no more about fire than Dune. Mostly, the book described the dangers of fire. A long section of it was about a building in Winifred Square that had caught fire 40 years ago, and how all its doors and all its furniture had burned up and smoke had filled the air for days. Another part was about what to do if your oven caught fire. Dune closed the book and sighed. It was useless. He could write a book better than that. He got up and wandered restlessly around the library. Sometimes you could find useful things just by choosing randomly from the shelves. He had done this many times. Just reached out and grabbed something, in the hope that by accident, he might come upon the very piece of information he needed. It would be something that another person had written down without understanding its significance. Just a sentence or two that would be like a flash of light in Dune's mind, fitting together with the things he already knew to make a solution to everything. Although he'd often found something interesting in these searches, he'd never found anything important, and today was no different. He did come across a collection called Mysterious Words from the Past, which he read for a while. It was about words and phrases so old that their meanings had been forgotten. He read a few pages. Heavens above indicates surprise. What heavens mean is unclear. It might be another word for floodlight. Hogwash means nonsense, though no one knows what a hog is or why one would wash it. Batting 1,000 indicates great success. This might possibly refer to killing bugs. All in the same boat means all in the same predicament. The meaning of boat is unknown. Interesting, but not useful. He put the book back on the shelf and was about to leave when the door of the library opened and Lena Mayfleet came in. So, let's consider this piece right here. What these things are is known as idiomatic expression. And what that basically means, or idioms, they're called idioms for short. What idioms basically are phrases and expressions that can't really be understood if you look at what they mean literally. They often are from some kind of experience, but they mean something different than what the words actually say, right? So batting 1,000 would rely on you understanding baseball. And since Ember doesn't have baseball, you could see where this doesn't make any sense at all to them anymore, right? all in the same boat. They don't know what a boat is. So they don't understand what it means to all be in the same boat. Now, there are bajillions of idiomatic expressions, tons of them, some of which have gone out of use, right? So one idiomatic expression that my grandmother used to like to say was, oh, that's been going on since Shep wore knee drawers. That idiomatic expression references the idea that when children were very little in the late 1800s and 1900s, their underwear went down to their knees. We don't have that anymore. So that idiomatic expression makes no sense to anybody, right? And what she meant by it was a long time ago, but the literal meaning is lost. Well, we've got idiomatic expressions in our language all the time. So something like it's raining cats and dogs, that doesn't literally mean animals are falling from the sky. You know that. You know it means it's a heavy rain. What the story is behind it, I don't know. But that's what makes idioms so interesting. And if you're a second language learner, it's what makes English language so frustrating. Because we say things like, we're all in the same boat, or, she gave me a dirty look. Those things don't really make sense literally, right? You have to understand what the meaning is about. So for somebody like Dune, who's looking at these words, they don't make literal sense to him, and he doesn't have the prior knowledge or schema to make sense of them, okay? So just an interesting window into what happens when a society evolves and loses some of its language. Now, going back to the character chart, you've got a lot of good Dune information here. You have to add that he's, again, grappling with his anger. You have to add that, again, he ends up accidentally killing a snail out of anger towards his coworkers. And that upsets him because the snail didn't deserve to die, right? You also want to add that he refuses to give up the search for answers. He's wandering through pipeworks on his free time. And even when he feels like he has given up, he does tell us that he's going to keep going. And now his quest is to find the movable light, which is fire, right? So all of those good details need to be added to Dune for Chapter 8. Let's continue. Chapter 9, the door in the roped-off tunnel. So the door in the roped-off tunnel is something that Dune found in the last section and assumed was not significant because the sign said that the tunnel had been caved in. But, you never can tell. Lena saw Dune immediately. He was reaching up to set a book back on its shelf. He saw her, too, when he turned around, and his dark eyebrows flew up in surprise as she hurried over to him. Your father told me you were here, she said. Dune, I found something. I want to show it to you. To me? Why? I think it's important. It has to do with the pipeworks. Will you come to my house and see it? Now? Dune asked. Lena nodded. Dune grabbed his old brown jacket and followed Lena out of the library and across the city to Quillam Square. Granny's shop was closed and dark when they arrived, and so Lena was surprised when they went upstairs and saw Eveline Murdo sitting in her place by the window. Your grandmother's in her bedroom, Mrs. Murdo said. She didn't feel well, so she asked me to come. Poppy was sitting on the floor, banging a spoon on the leg of a chair. Lena introduced Dune and then led him into the room she shared with Poppy. He looked around, and Lena felt suddenly self-conscious, seeing her room through his eyes. It was a small room with a lot crammed into it. There were 2 narrow beds, a very small table that fit into the corner, and a 4-legged stool to sit on. On the wall, clothes hung from hooks, and more clothes were strewn untidily on the floor. Beneath the window was a brown stain made by the bean seed in its pot on the windowsill. Lena had been watering it every night because she had promised Clary she would, but it was still nothing but dirt, flat and unpromising. A couple of shelves beside the window held Lena's important possessions. The pieces of paper she'd collected for drawing, her pencils, a scarf with a silver thread woven through it. On the parts of the wall that had no hooks and no shelves, she had pinned up some of her pictures. What are those? Dune asked. They're from my imagination. Lena said, feeling slightly embarrassed. They're pictures of another city. Oh, you made it up. Sort of. Sometimes I dream of it. I draw too, said Dune, but I draw other kinds of things. Like what? Mostly insects, said Dune. He told her about his collection of drawings and the worm he was currently observing. To Lena, this sounded far less interesting than an undiscovered city, but she did not say so. She led Dune over to the table. Here's what I want to show you, she said. She lifted the metal box. Before she could reach for the papers underneath, Dune took the box and started examining it. Where did this come from? He asked. It was in the closet, Lena said. She told him about Granny's wild search and about finding the box with its lid open and Poppy with paper in her mouth. As she talked, Dune turned the box over in his hands, opened and closed its lid, and peered at the latch. There's some sort of odd mechanism here, he said. He tapped at a small metal compartment at the front of the box. I'd like to see inside this. Here's what was in the box, said Lena, lifting the covering paper from her patchwork of scraps. At least, it's what's left of what was in there. Dune bent over, his hands on either side of the paper. Lena said, It's called Instructions for Egriston, or maybe Egrisman? Someone's name, anyhow. Maybe a mayor or a guard. I just call it the instructions. I told the mayor about it. I thought maybe it was important. I wrote him a note, but he hasn't answered. I don't think he's interested. Dune said nothing. You don't have to hold your breath, said Lena. I glued the pieces down. Look, she said, pointing. This word must be pipeworks, and this one, river. And look at this one, door. Dune didn't answer. His hair had fallen forward so Lena couldn't see the expression on his face. I thought at first, Lena went on, that it must be instructions for how to do something, how to fix electricity maybe. But then I thought, what if it's instructions for going to another place? Dune said nothing, so Lena went on. I mean, someplace that isn't here, like another city. I think these instructions say go down into the pipeworks and look for a door. Dune brushed the hair back from his face, but he didn't straighten up. He gazed at the broken words and frowned. Edge, he murmured. Small steel pan. What would that mean? A frying pan? Said Lena. But I don't know why there'd be a frying pan in the pipeworks. But Dune didn't answer. He seemed to be talking to himself. He kept reading, moving a finger along the lines of words. Open, he whispered. Follow. Finally, he turned to look at Lena. I think you're right, he said. I think this is important. Oh, I was sure you'd think so, Lena cried. She was so relieved that the words poured out in a rush. Because you take things seriously. You told the truth to the mayor on assignment day. I didn't want to believe it. But then came the long blackout, and I knew things were as bad as you said. She stopped breathless. She pointed to a word on the document. This door, she said. It has to be a door that leads out of Ember. I don't know, said Dune, maybe. Or a door that leads to something important, even if it isn't that. But it must be that. What else could be so important to lock up in a fancy box? Well, I suppose it could be a storage room with some special tools in it or something. A look of surprise came over his face. Actually, I saw a door where I didn't expect to see one. Out in Tunnel 351, it was locked. I thought it was an old supply closet. I wonder if that could be it. It must be, cried Lena. Her heart sped up. It wasn't anywhere near the river, Dune said doubtfully. That doesn't matter, Lena said. The river goes through the pipeworks, that's all. It's probably something like go down by the river and then go this way and then that way. Maybe, said Dune. It must be, Lena cried. I know it is. It's the door that leads out of Ember. I don't know if that makes sense, said Dune. A door in the pipeworks could only lead to something underground, and how could that? Lena had no patience for Dune's reasoning. She wanted to dance around the room. She was so excited. We have to find out, she said. We have to find out right away. Dune looked startled. Well, I can go and try the door again, he said. It was locked before, but I suppose I want to go too, said Lena. You want to come down into the pipeworks? Yes. Can you get me in? Dune thought for a moment. I think I can. If you come just at quitting time and wait outside the door, I'll stay out of sight until everyone is gone, and then I'll let you in. Tomorrow? Okay, tomorrow. Lena stopped at home the next day, only long enough to change out of her messenger jacket, and then she dashed across town to the pipeworks. Dune met her just outside the door, and she followed him inside, where he handed her a slicker and boots to put on. They descended the long stone stairway, and when they came out into the main tunnel, Lena stood still, staring at the river. I didn't know the river was so big, she said, after she found her voice. Yes, said Dune. Every few years they say someone falls in, and if you fall in, there is no hope of fishing you out. The river swallows you up and sweeps you away. Lena shivered. It was cold down here, a cold that she felt all the way through. Cold flesh, cold blood, cold bones. Dune led her up the path beside the water. After a while, they came to an opening in the wall, and they turned into it and left the river behind. Dune led the way through the winding tunnels. Their rubber boots splashed in pools of water on the floor. Lena thought how awful it would be to work down here all day, every day. It was a creepy place, a place where it seemed people didn't belong. That black river, it was like something in a bad dream. You have to duck here, said Dune. They had come to a roped-off tunnel. But there's no light in there, Lena said. No, said Dune. We have to feel our way. It isn't far. He ducked under the rope and went in, and Lena did the same. They stepped forward into the dark. Lena kept a hand against the damp wall and placed her feet carefully. It's right here, said Dune. He stopped a few feet ahead of Lena. She came up behind him. Put your hands out, he said. You will feel it. Lena felt a smooth, hard surface. There was a round metal knob, and below the knob, a keyhole. It seemed an ordinary door, not at all like the entrance to a new world. But that's what made things so exciting. Nothing was ever how you expected it to be. Let's try it, she whispered. Dune took hold of the knob and twisted. Locked, he said. Is there a pan anywhere? A pan? The instructions said small steel pan. Maybe that would have the key in it. They felt around, but there was nothing, just rocky walls. They patted the walls. They put their ears to the door. They jiggled the knob and pulled it and pushed it. Finally, Dune said, well, we can't get in. I guess we'd better go. And that was when they heard the noise. It was a scuffling, scraping noise that seemed to be coming from somewhere nearby. Lena stopped breathing. She clutched Dune's arm. Quick, Dune whispered. He made his way back toward the lighted tunnel, and Lena followed. They ducked under the rope and rounded a turn, then stopped, stood still, and listened. A harsh scraping sound, a thud, a pause. And then the sound of an impact, a short, explosive breath, and a muttered word in a gruff, low voice. Then slow footsteps, getting closer. They flattened themselves against the wall and stood motionless. The footsteps stopped briefly, and there was another grunt. Then the steps continued, but seemed to be fading. In a moment, from a distance, there was another sound, the chink of a key turning in the lock and the click of a latch opening. Lena made an astonished face at Dune. Someone had gone down the rope tunnel and opened the door. She put her mouth close to Dune's ear. Shall we try to see who it is? She whispered. Dune shook his head. I don't think we should, he said. We should go. We could just peek around the corner. It was too tempting not to try. They crept forward to the place where the tunnel turned. From there, they could see the entrance to the rope tunnel. Holding their breath, they watched, and in a minute, they heard a thump and a click, the door closing, the lock turning, and the footsteps once again, this time quick. A long leg stepped over the rope, and the person it belonged to turned and walked away. All they saw was his back, a dark coat, dark, untidied hair. He walked with a lurching motion that struck Lena as somehow familiar. In a few seconds, he had vanished into the shadows. When they came up out of Pipeworks, they stripped off their boots and slickers and hurried out into Plumber Square, where they flopped down on a bench and burst into a furious talk. Someone got there before us, said Lena. Dune said he was walking slowly when he went in, as if he were looking for something, and he walked fast when he came out, as if he found something. What was it? I can't stand not to know. Dune jumped up. He paced back and forth in front of the bench. But how did he get the key? He asked. Did he find instructions like the one you found? And how did he get into Pipeworks? I don't think he works there. There's something familiar about the way he walks, said Lena, but I don't know why. Well, anyhow, he opened the door and we can't, said Dune. If it does go somewhere, if it does lead out of Ember, he'll be telling the whole town pretty soon. He'll be a hero. Dune sat down again. If he's found the way out, we'll be glad, of course, he said glumly. Doesn't matter who finds it, as long as it helps the city. That's right, Lena said. It's just that I thought we were going to find it, said Dune. Yes, Lena said, thinking how grand it would have been to stand before all of Ember announcing their discovery. They sat without talking for a while, lost in their own thoughts. A man pulling a cart full of wood scraps went by. A woman leaned from a lighted window on Gappery Street and called out to some boys playing in the square below. A couple of guards in their red and brown uniforms ambled across the square, laughing. The town clock rang out 6 deep booms that Lena could feel like shudders beneath her ribs. Dune said, I guess what we do now is wait to see if there's an announcement. I guess so, said Lena. Maybe that door is nothing special after all, said Dune. Maybe it's just an old unused supply closet. But Lena wasn't ready to believe that. Maybe it wasn't the door out of Ember. But it was a mystery nonetheless, a mystery connected, she was sure, to the bigger mystery they were trying to solve. So at this point, you're going to want to go back to your character charts and you're going to want to add, under significant events, that Lena and Dune have gone down into the pipeworks, that they have tried to open the mysterious door that would not open, and that they caught someone trying to get into that room who was successful. And they don't know who it was.